Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. General Raj Shukla has joined me today once again. Today, I invited the General to talk to me about a seminal agreement between the India and the United States in the area of semiconductors, one of the pivotal critical technology sectors that will determine many things, including defense cooperation in the future. General, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Hindol. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back with you.
Welcome, General. I wanted to begin by asking you, you have mentioned that this semiconductor agreement that the US and India have signed is in many ways very critical. One of the reasons, of course, you've explained why this is critical is that, in a sense, semiconductor chips are like not like the new oil, I guess, but one of the most critical aspects of everything from our mobile phones to our defense technology. And India is a laggard in this domain, whereas China, of course, is burgeoning forward. Explain to us why you think at this moment the India and US and the India coming together is critical on this aspect.
So, Hindol, as you just remarked, not only the chip, but the ability to miniaturize computing power and strategic microelectronics, in my view, are the high ground for national security. And if I may make just one more assertion, that Cold War I was won by the Americans for a host of reasons, but also because of the chip and their ability to miniaturize computing power and the failure of Soviet Union to do so. Cold War 2.0, its outcomes will be shaped majorly by chips. If World War II was won on the back of, industrial age arsenals and their ability to create steel and aluminium, digital age militaries, their performance will be based on the outcomes of the chip fabs, both self-sufficiency and quantity of chips. And we all talk of Amritkal. The destiny of Amritkal may be shaped by chips. So you said oil, they are a little more than oil. Look at Ukraine. Everything from, the simplest of drones to hypersonics has chips in it. So it is really the lifeline of modern combat. If you notice, Russian air power in Ukraine was absent for a while. It wasn't doing so well. Till the Chinese gave them chips, they put them into legacy bombs and made them precise glide bombs. Without Chinese microelectronics and the chip in particular, Russian resurgence in the Ukraine conflict would not be possible. I'll just give you a small anecdote. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union was doing better than the Americans insofar as the larger aspects of science was concerned. You would recall that they put the cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin in space even before the Americans. They also launched the Sputnik satellite before the Americans. Now, what happens there, and this is based on that lovely book on Chip War by Chris Miller, what happens is that while the Americans realize the value of the chip and computing power and create Silicon Valley to you create the chip in accord with Moore's law and put it into the American systems. The Soviet Union has a similar opportunity, but there is a scientist called Boris Malin who has worked for a while in American universities and is very proficient in chips. He goes to a gentleman called Alexander Shokin, who's really the Soviet bureaucrat in charge of technology. And he tells him that here is the chip and we must innovate. But this Soviet bureaucrat tells him, don't worry about innovation, copy the chip one for one without deviations. And they get into copying the chip, and copying can never keep pace with Moore's law because innovation was moving so fast. The Soviet Union also had a Zelenograd, something like the Silicon Valley, which Khrushchev had inaugurated, but they didn't take it forward. And then this chip went into anti-tank guns, into artillery, into missiles, into ICBMs. And the Soviet Union realized that the American aggregate armory was more precise. They didn't stand a chance. And so they conceded the Cold War. In fact, there is one Marshal Ogarkov who makes this categoric statement to a journalist in 1983, 7 to 8 years before the Cold War ended, that we have lost the Cold War. So this is the primacy of the chip. I told you what's happening in Ukraine. Now, see, in India's case, what has happened is three, four good things have happened. And that is why I have mentioned in that article that even Indian statecraft is coming of age. So you have the IDEX program, which over these 5, 6 years has identified talented Indian startups. So they've gone through a very competitive system, and Third ITech is one of those startups. Now, this startup is so good, it showed, what shall I say, a good proficiency in chips. So through the ISET, they get connected to US Spacecom. If ISET wasn't there, this would not have happened. Two, through IndusX, they are taking innovation forward. And now, after this deal, Bharat Semi, Third ITech, US Spacecom will make chips for national security, for green energy, and also for next generation communications. And India will now become a chip maker through the Indian Semiconductor Mission. So it is all of this coming together. ISET, IndusX, IDEX, Semiconductor Mission, and these Indian startups who now stand a chance, and they are talented enough for the US Spacecom to do a deal with him. So in that sense, it has been, a battle over the last 7 to 8 years of getting talent together, letting the IDEX system mature. And just by coincidence, this startup, or why coincidence? I mean, Third ITech got its first order from the Indian Army. And not in chips, but in a different domain that enabled them to take off. And now they are, this great thing of a semiconductor fab. So that is why I think it is, not only self-sufficiency, but if all works out, which it should, it'll take our whole province to a game-changing high.
Two or three things come to mind, General, as one listens to you explain this. One, of course, it's well known, certainly in defense circles, but perhaps not so much outside, that while America is the great innovator in chip making, which, as you correctly point out, is used in perhaps every aspect possible in the world now, in the world of technology, a large number of chips that America uses, of course, are not produced in America. They're produced in Taiwan, Taiwan being the global leader in many ways, especially of the free world, of creating these chips. Now, one of the great things that America wants to do, of course, is create sustainable supply chains, because they're afraid that this supply chain one day will at least be interrupted, if not badly impeded, considering what's happening between China and Taiwan. Of course, having India develop a full hub to manufacture these chips would be of great resilience, especially when we come to the point that even today, a large number of, India has become its defense exports. America is one of the biggest importers of India's defense exports. Of course, we produce a lot of, supply chain sort of material at the moment, which lands up in America. Now, these supply chains are getting integrated in a certain way. Talk to us a little bit about how you see that.
So, you're absolutely right. I'm told that, let's take the supply chain of the semiconductor. I'm told from sand to finished product, the supply chain passes through 70 countries, 70, which means that no country can do every part of the chip making stuff. So you have to just to be smart enough to identify and dominate the, what shall we say, the value additions of the supply chain. Now here America realizes it made a mistake. So it is setting those fabs back. All the fabs are in Taiwan. The lithography comes from, ASML, which is a Dutch company, which is also another critical thing. And the design is happening in the US. So now what the Americans are doing, see, when you raise this issue, they realize in 2020, China was stuck at 40 nanometers. In 2023, out of the blue, SMIC, which is a Chinese chip making company, and Huawei they come up with 7 nanometers. That rattles the Americans. Now the game is in 3 nanometers and they've put all that CHIPS Act and all. I'm told the lead is 10 years. They are determined to increase the lead. So, they've got in touch with the Dutch and this ASML. And the previous Dutch Prime Minister, I'm forgetting his name, he met Biden 6, 7 times. And now, because the Dutch have not given this lithography technology to the Chinese, presumably the Prime Minister has been rewarded by making him Secretary General of NATO. So, that's how grim the competition is, not to allow Chinese access to all this. And the game is also shifting to AI, because the real AI-enabled chips, they will come from the frontier models of AI. Now, the other day I was listening to Eric Schmidt. So he was saying that, for a while, or the whole game there is in the AI frontier models. Now, these are $300 billion, extremely expensive, energy guzzlers, and there are just 2 to 3 of them, and the Chinese and Americans are in the game. And what is happening there, he said that over the last, from January to April or so, the trailing models had begun to catch up with the frontier models, which means other countries had a chance. Now that America and China are laser focused on this advanced chips, the frontier model, the lag between the frontier and training models has once again grown, which means that I and you, India, will get the products, the fruit, but the AI hegemons will still remain America and China. So that is why this whole battle is very grim. And of course, we have started late. The Indian semiconductor mission is good. But by pulling off this deal, what are we doing? Once this fab gets going and this chip business happens in one of these corridors, either the UP defense corridor or the Tamil Nadu defense corridor, this fab will also, firstly, we spend 8,500 crores on chip import. Now you will have indigenous chips. Bell itself imports chips of 1,800 crores. And what we will start doing, we have a chance of supplying these chips to Quad, the Indo-Pacific, and even the Global South. And in the long run, if this, develops, such companies like Third Eye Tech, Bharat Semi, they will be the national champions of tomorrow. If China, out of 20 of the, leading defense primes are Chinese, why not India? So I agree with you, we have started late. There are great complexities which I tried to explain. The battle is really grim. There is strong contestation, but we have begun and hopefully we will get into the game.
You, of course, alluded a little while ago to Mark Rutte, the former
You're right.
Netherlands head of state, who, of course, held many conversations with Biden,
Yes,
including in 2023,
Yeah.
where Biden tried to persuade him not to cooperate, or in his country not to cooperate with China in many ways in providing the most advanced sort of chip making technologies and cooperation in that area. Talk to me a little bit about the signal this chip making, this semiconductor agreement between India and the US sends also to the EU and indeed to Netherlands and other parts of the world in how the supply chains of semiconductors as envisaged by the US is going to move in the next 10, 20 years.
So, look at this fab. This fab is looking at what I will say the high end of microelectronics and semiconductors. This is not an ordinary fab. It is, the semiconductor chips will be IR, gallium nitride, silicon carbide. So these are what they call non-silicon chips. So they are very useful in national security, in advanced sensing, in communications, and in power electronics. These are niche aspects. So they will go into the high-end aircraft, high-end submarines, so on and so forth. So these kind of chips, and I'm told this is the first of its kind, it is also an integrated fab design network. See, today the problem with chips is the fabs are in Taiwan. So the Chinese are looking to separate the fabs from the design network by cutting off the cables or through quarantine. So when you have design and fab integrated, which is what I'm told the semiconductor fab will be, and they are in these absolute niche domains, the supply chain advantages will be, the locus will be India. And why the Americans are sharing this technology and all with us, I presume because they also realize that a technologically enabled strategic military Indian complex is in the American national interest. So I
Also
think all
because
these things are
it's
coming
far more
together.
resilient than keeping it in Taiwan. I mean, in the long
Certainly.
run, you would much rather have it in India, a vibrant, very large democracy, rather than keeping it in Taiwan within, in a
Yes,
sense,
exactly.
China's arm's reach. Talk to
Absolutely.
us a little bit about the impact of this on India's defense indigenization capabilities. We are finally at a point in our history, General, where the conversation that India's security can no longer be in any real shape or form in the long term outsourced is really ripe. And therefore this has comes to a point where even the most advanced jets and other technologies that we import, all of them, like you were saying, will require advanced chips to work. Now where will we get them from? It's no point getting that great aircraft if finally at the moment of crisis you don't have the chip supply chain ready. Talk to us a little bit about the impact of defense indigenization of this particular agreement.
So, uh, because of the reasons that you just outlined, Atmanirbharta in defense has been a game-changing endeavor, especially in two aspects. Before this, what shall I say, this generation, see, we've always talked of self-sufficiency in defense. When have we not talked of it? But what has happened in the earlier years, perhaps it was sloganeering, because for this self-sufficiency, we depended on defense PSUs and even DRDO, who could not really deliver on niche technologies. Now, in the second, shall we say, avatar of Atmanirbharta in defense, which the Modi government has launched, the greater reliance is on private sectors and startups. Look at the Airbus and Tata. Tata Airbus deal, it is posing a challenge to HAL to smarten up. Look at the lesson from Ukraine. In Ukraine, you will see trench warfare. You will see Cold War era legacy systems like tanks, aircraft, artillery. But what is taking both these instruments to a game changing high is bleeding edge technologies. And Hindol, there, all the instruments which are delivering are startups. From Hawkeye 360 to Elon Musk to Alex Carr's Palantir. All this is happening. And what are these startups doing? They are basically helping militaries climb the AI, autonomy, robotics, chips, food combat chain. India has to ascend this AI, robotics, autonomy, chip combat chain. And if you have to ascend this, the answer perhaps is in private sectors and startups. Because defense PSUs and all are simply not nimble enough to compete in this field. And therefore, just like Ukrainians are doing so, all these startups in Ukraine, I'm quoting Mark Milley, he says 250 of those startups led by AI Helsing, Palantir, so on and so forth, have had the most fundamental impacts in the character of war in recorded history. Dronery, precisionry. See, I'm a gunner. We used to carry out artillery shoots in 55 minutes, 45 to 55 minutes. Today, with these so-called flying binoculars, which are drones, those shoots are being carried out in 5 minutes. Ukraine, a country without a navy, used crewed drones and Starlink of Musk to knock out the iconic Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol. So private sector, startups, bleeding edge technologies, chips is just one of them. So chips, now we have to make similar endeavors in AI, similar endeavors in quantum. Quantum is again going to be game changing. Quantum radars, quantum communications, it will break every known code. The CIA says that the quantum is a bigger threat than China because it will break every known code. So this whole technology game is really being upped. And therefore, chips is a very good start, but we need to take it, as I said, to AI, to robotics, to autonomy, and all. And Here, the good news is that IDEX has created all these startups. There are a whole lot of them. From Dhruv Space, there are ones in drones. There is that Samir Joshi, Third iTech, 114 AI, in diverse fields. And my experience with them has been wonderful because they are talented, they are entrepreneurial. Look at this Third iTech. It's just not getting this deal. They've been entrepreneurial, getting through to US Spacecom, going to Washington, spending days, looking for meetings with TSMC. Nobody puts their money on such, thing without checking you out 3, 4 times. Indian army, Indian bureaucracies. So it's also it's a gigantic effort.
Talk to us a little bit about this. This will require, India, of course, will and is building Atmanirbhar or self-reliant capacity in this. But in order to make the technological leaps, at least in the short to mid-term, US cooperation is extremely valuable. How do you see this partnership develop? Because, this has a mixed, at the very least, a mixed history. There are still, even today, lots of very complicated pinpricks in this relationship. And yet, in many ways, in many substantial ways, the relationship is moving forward very fast. We are discussing one, of course, today. A few months ago, of course, there was the big SOSA deal, the supply agreement, and many others. There is, this relationship in real material terms seems to be really taking new shape and new breath. But it's still, at least from public perception, a complicated relationship. How do you see this proceed, especially with the new president coming into office in November in the US?
I get your point, but see, I think India is singularly lucky in the fact that no matter who comes to office, whether it is Vice President Harris or it is Mr. Trump, India is pretty okay with both the parties. So in that sense, we don't have to worry about that bit. We are okay with the prospective Harris administration as also a Trump administration. And the larger issue that you say, I mean, a couple of things have come together. One is our dependence on the Russians is very high. We ourselves want to wean off, from a singular source of supply. So while the Russian relationship has stood us in great stead, it is a great friendship. The Americans can be game changing in other ways. Russians for legacy systems, Americans for technologies. And here, look at ISET. ISET is about unleashing the private sector startup storm of both countries. IndusX is an opportunity in innovation. And USA knows, I mean, it's not doing us a favor. It knows that Indian talent is good. All their companies or many of their companies are being headed by Indians. So they know that they can do it only if they can create the technological US, I mean, the technological ecosystem. And it so happens, I mean, that they know that India is one of those countries which, if it is technologically enabled, it could stand up to the Chinese. I mean, we've stood up to them in Galwan. And if we have these technologies.
So in fintech, I mean, I still remember in 2017 and stuff, China was leaps and bounds ahead of India, and India's obviously really caught up and, in fact, advanced far beyond what the Chinese do in fintech. But I want to ask you, despite US India cooperation, the gulf between India and China is really, really large, especially in technology and especially in defense technology. Let's take the example, for instance, of what China is doing in its navy. It's building a navy of the size of India's navy almost every single year. I mean, it's incredible. This is probably the biggest expansion in naval terms that has ever happened in history. A lot of people worry, General, that in spite of all these good things that are happening that you and I are discussing today, the gulf simply is too large. How do you see that?
So there's good news and there's bad news. So let's start with the bad news first. So look at the Chinese. America spends $975 billion on research, not military, but science across the board. I'm quoting the chairman of the American Science Foundation, who I think is the Indian American, Dr. Panchanathan. He says the American Science Foundation is the offensive arm of Pentagon. Without us, Pentagon is mere defense. Now look at that whole outlook. Our outlook has to change. Look at how competitive they are. The Chinese are spending $575 billion on R&D. We spend 25. Look at that, 575, 25. Should that surprise you, therefore, that, in high impact research in areas like hypersonics, aircraft engines, 50% of the papers are coming from China? I mean, so that is a reality. You were talking of the Navy. Now we learn that their Air Force also is going to be the biggest in the world.
That's right.
Look at their rocket force and all that. So that is the bad. I'll give you one more example. See, I'm told every 10 years they look at one technology. So the Politburo 10 years back looked at batteries. Now, what did they do in batteries? They designed an entire university ecosystem which offered 50 courses on batteries. So battery chemicals, battery metallurgy, battery this, battery that. They have created a whole generation of graduates, postgraduates, and doctorates in batteries. They've identified one university in central China, which is the nodal university for batteries, and it is in sync with the PLA Academy of Sciences, Civil Military Fusion. Should that surprise you now that BYD is driving Volkswagen out of the car market on batteries? And batteries are powering space, they are powering military stuff. The Indian Army has 80 guns. They have a huge signature because in that trail of 5 to 6 vehicles, 4 are generators, power source. If you miniaturize it, see what happens to your signatures. What happens in submarines? But it starts off from batteries. So China, we have to concede, is doing these things. But I'll give you the good news. The asymmetry of military power. So Russia today, its economy is $2 to $3 trillion. USA and the West put together is $40 trillion. Who's winning the war? So there are options if we get a lot of other things together. So budgets certainly, but within the budgets, innovation, civil military fusion, theater commands, if we simply look ahead. So I agree with you, the China challenge is enormous. But see, the point is this, the Chinese are 5 feet tall. By what they do when they do well, we must grant it to them, they become 8 feet tall. When we don't do what we should be doing, common sense, R&D, for example, we make the Chinese 12 feet tall. So if you do your stuff, he will only be 7 feet tall and not 12 feet. So we have no option now. And therefore, I think today, at least on technologies, we have no option but to cooperate with US. And knowing fully well that they will not shed blood for us. Why should they? So we are improving our posture elsewhere. Perhaps legacy platforms will still continue to come from Russia and other sources. But we've also diversified now, France and so on and so forth. And technologies of the future, if they are coming from the Americans, it's good for us. And America is giving it to us because they know now that we are the third most powerful country in the world, geopolitical toast of the world. So I think both our interests are coming together. But I agree with you, China is a challenge, and therefore we need to do far more. I've been screaming from the top floor, from rooftops that we really need to do far more.
My last question then, General. In the past, there's always been this on the Indian side at least, there's been this hesitation that what if a lot of technology comes from the West, comes from America, and at a critical moment something is denied to us, some critical part, some critical strategic element is denied to us. Do you see that mentality shift now? Not because of anything else, but as you were saying, because America itself needs help. America requires a steady supply, resilient supply chain, which it no longer, at least in the mid to long term, no longer can see in Taiwan.
So, see, there are 2 to 3 points. It was long back, Hindol, I think 80s or 90s. I don't recollect which paper, but centerpiece was headline, the wallflower and the dance of the dinosaurs. So India was the wallflower. The 2 dinosaurs, USA and USSR, would not even ask us for a dance. Today, we are the geopolitical toast of the world. Everybody wants to do business with India. So that is one good thing. And the second, look at in this deal. In this deal, it's not about technology transfer, it's about knowledge transfer. So the technologies are being transferred. They are being transferred to the startup because the US sees talent and there will be some commerce worked out in it. So there is commerciality in the deal, but they will give us this technology. In fact, I made this point in the article that the Prime Minister must be complimented for his courage in making sure that there is access to technologies which have been hitherto denied. If it had been an ordinary company, the Americans would not have shared it. They see the prospects in the startup, they've tested them through. So the point is, if we have similar startups who show promise, the Americans will share technology, not all of it, much of it. And also, once this starts happening, our startups will be smart enough to develop their own technology. So far, what had happened, the DPSUs were doing what you are suggesting. Technology transfer, take it from them. They will always give you 2 generations behind or deny you technology. Then you run to the Israelis who sell it to you at 9 times the cost and all the profits they put into their R&D and produce this fantastic mobile, exploding mobiles and all. So, it has to be. See, the final point I'll make is this, that national security is extremely complex, very sophisticated. You need the best minds. What is Ukraine? It is a war of geniuses. Elon Musk, Alex Karp. It is not ordinary men. And we really have to get our national security piece together because, good, a lot of things are in our favor. But one thing which could reverse Amrit Kaal is a national security reversal. And I mean, just make a final point. See, geopolitics is extremely brutal. It is extremely unforgiving of those that don't respect national security. They don't spare even the USA. See what's happened to the US in Ukraine. So we really need to get our national security piece together. And a lot of changes have been made, but I couldn't agree with you more for 2 reasons. Because of the enormity of the China challenge. It is acquiring military power at an astonishing clip. And the changes in the character of war, which I said. We have to really step up our game, in speed and scale.
General, we'll have to leave it at that. But this is a very important note in which to leave this conversation. No doubt in coming months, we'll have many more opportunities to talk to you as the story, as it were, develops. Thanks very much for taking time today to explain your perspective on this critical semiconductor deal between India and the United States. General Raj Shukla, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Hindol. I enjoyed the conversation greatly. Look forward to many more. Thanks a lot.